Okay guys, this is going to be item number 18 for our 7th grade class. We are going to be talking about probability. Probability. Okay, so you should have already taken your 6 vocab terms from the beginning in your Canvas, and you should have been familiar with the different terms that I might be using. So we're going to talk about a couple of things that are really important. So we're going to make these little bullet points. We would say a probability of 0, or you might see 0%, means the event is impossible, or it will never happen. Can never happen. So if I say I'm going to roll a dice of 1 that has 1 and through 6 numbers on it, what's the probability that I'm going to roll a 7? It's 0, because there's no way that I can roll a 7. Okay? And likewise, a probability of 1 or 100% means the event is certain to happen, or it will always happen. So if I roll a dice or I flip a spinner that only has red sections, what's the probability that I'm going to get a red section? That's 100%, because there's no other options. It's always going to be a red section. So the probabilities of all outcomes in a sample space must add up to 1. So usually they're going to be in a decimal or a fractional form, and that's how we're going to know what they add up to. So you're always going to see them adding up to 1. Okay, so let's look at this little chart, and that'll kind of give you a good idea of the spectrum of probabilities. So we're going to have 0%, 0, and these will be fractions over here. Decimals in our second row, and percents in our third row. So 0, 0, and 0%. And that basically means that that never happens. Okay, so this section would be never happens. Conversely, on the other side, if it always happens, we would have a 1 for a fraction, a 1 for a decimal, and a 100 for the percent. Somewhere in the middle, we would have, well, the middle between 0 and 1 is, in a fraction, is 1/2. In a decimal, it's 0.5. And in a fraction, or a percent, it's 50%. And that one, we would say, happens about half the time, right? Happens about half the time. Okay, so in between, we might have over here, we would have a quarter, which our decimal would be 0.25, and our percentage would be 25%, because it's halfway between 0 and 1/2. Halfway between 1/2 and 100 on the upside would be 3/4, or 0.75, or 75%. So your probability is going to fall somewhere in there between 0 and 1. So let's look at some examples. let's find the probability of outcomes in a sample space. Okay, so what if it said the weather forecast spelled that wrong, forecasts a 30% chance of snow. Okay, well, we would say P, which we would call, say, the probability of, that's how we're going to read that. Probability of, and the event goes inside the parentheses, of there being snow is, we could just use equals, I guess, is 30% according to this, right? And how else can we write 30%? We can also write it as a decimal, which would be 0.3, right? And if you wrote it as a fraction, again, that would be 3/10. Okay? So the probability of there not being snow, well, we know that probability from up here earlier, it says that probability has to add up to 1. So if we have 1 and we take away the probability of it snowing, which is 0.3, that's going to equal 0.7, which we know is 7/10 or 70%. So that is 70% chance that it is not going to snow. Okay, or we could also have a spinner, very simple spinner that has quarters. Okay, this one is red, this one is red, this one is yellow, and this one is blue. Well, what's the probability that we're going to choose red? So probability of red when we spin, well, it's 1/2 of the circle, so we'll say it's 1/2. You could also say it's 50%. You could also say it is 0.5, right? What about the probability of going yellow? Well, look, it's 1/4 of the circle, so we could say 1/4, or we might say 25%, which we could also say is 0.25 in a decimal. Okay, what about the probability of spinning a blue? You should already kind of get how we're doing this. Well, blue is accounted for 1/4 of the circle, so the probability is 1/4, and that would be 25%, which we could also write as a decimal of 0.25. So actually the probability of spinning a blue or a yellow is the same, and the probability of spinning a yellow is slightly, or a red is slightly more, or double actually what the blue and the other are. Okay, and if we want to check and make sure that that is correct, we would add up the probabilities of each. So 1/4 plus 1/4 is 1/2, plus another 1/2 is 1, and that adds up to 1 because we know that the probabilities all have to, in the sample space, all have to add up to 1, and these ones do. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at another one. I'm going to flip the page. If you need to pause, go ahead and do so. Okay? Let's see. I'm going to be talking about some chocolate. I love chocolate. I'm sure you do too, right? So there are 3 types of chocolate. Okay? And of the 3 types, we have white chocolate, we have dark chocolate, and we have light chocolate, which I guess I would call milk chocolate, right? All right, so if the probability of white is 4/10, and the probability of dark chocolate is, of pulling dark chocolate out, is 2/5, we want to know what's the light one. Well, we know that if we add the probabilities together, they're going to equal 1, right? So we'll take white, which is 4/10, We're going to add the dark, which is 2/5, and we're going to add the unknown, which will just make an x, and that's going to be equal to 1. Okay, so if you remember how to combine our fractions or how to add them, they have to have common denominators. So we would need this one to have a 10, so this would become 4/10 plus, well, to make this 10, we multiply by 2, so we do the same thing to the numerator. So 2 times 2 is 4, so this would be 4/10 plus x is equal to 1. So this would be 8/10 plus x is equal to 1. Now you remember from our little algebra that we need to subtract that from the other side. So we're going to subtract 8/10 from both sides because it's attached to the variable by a plus sign. We're going to do the opposite. So then the x is going to be equal to 2/10, and we can reduce that to 1/5 if we want to, right? So we would say that the probability of getting light chocolate would be, so we'd say light, the probability is 1/5, okay? And we're going to know that the total amount of chocolates must be 10 chocolates, right? And that would be how many chocolates she chose to put in her bag. Okay, so that's how we would figure it out if we were given probability and asked to find a missing one. Okay, and then there's a couple more that I want us to go over that are more like word problems. Okay, so let's look at some results from a quiz. Okay, so here's the score and here's the probability. So I'm going to tell you that we have 5 questions on a quiz, and you have no idea what you're doing, so you're going to guess on all 5 questions of the quiz. And we want to know what the probability is of you getting some right. Okay, so there's 3 multiple choice and 2 true or false, and we're going to randomly guess on every single question. So the probability that you're going to score as 0 is 0.105. The probability that you would score a 1 is 0.316. The probability that you would score a 2 is 0.352. The probability that you would score a 3 is 0.180. Probability that you would score a 4 is 0.043, and the probability that you score a 5 is 0.004. Very, very unlikely, right? So what is the probability of guessing 4 or more? So we'll add the 2 probabilities together. We'll add the 4, because we know that's a 4, 0.043, and the 5, because that's more, 0.004, and we're going to get 0.047, which when we change it to a decimal, that's going to be 4.7% that you would get 4 or more, right? What about the probability that we would get 3 or fewer? So we're going to start with 3, 0.180, add the lower ones, 0.352 and 0.316 and 0.105, okay, which is pretty big. And then we're going to add all those together. So if that is going to equal 0.773, and when we turn that into a decimal, that's going to be 77.3%. So the percent that you would get 3 or less, the probability is going to be 77.3% that you would get that or less. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to talk about for this whole little section on probability. So you're going to do the probability homework next, which will be the next little section in your Canvas unit. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and finish up your notes. Make sure you put everything, including the vocab, into your notes, and then you're going to do the homework next, followed by the homework quiz.